Hey, well, good evening, everyone. We're just waiting for everyone to log in. So as our attendee count keeps increasing, we'll just stay silent for a little bit. Maybe we'll sing some Christmas carols in the interim. But meanwhile, welcome everybody. If you just be patient for a couple of minutes, we'll allow everybody just to synchronize their watches. Okay, well, I'll begin with a screen share. You folks let me know, make sure that I'm on the right screen there. And okay, are you getting a full screen view? Okay, thank you. Excellent. Well, welcome everyone to Preservation Options for Forests and Farms. I'm with the New Jersey Forestry Association. I'm Rich Kelsky, Vice President and a Director of the organization. And we're here tonight with some outstanding panelists from free organizations. And I'm just going to click on something, if I may, for a moment. And just bear with me, please. Okay, well, Tricia Aspinwall is with us from the Nature Conservancy, Richard Dodds from the New Jersey Conservation Foundation, and Peter Coetzee from the American Farmland Trust. They will introduce themselves further as we move into the presentation. I wanted to thank our last month's presenter, Ethan Tapper, for participating in November's Backyard Forestry. And Ethan did a great job. He presented on his book, How to Love a Forest. It was a very heartfelt presentation. I heard from several folks who actually almost teared up while they were watching him. So it's really something you should watch on YouTube. It's a great, great video. Upcoming programs, we haven't yet announced our January 16th program. We're working with two possible presenters. And as you can imagine, post-holiday timing is always a little difficult for people. So we're wrestling with that, but we'll get that out to you as soon as possible. Our annual meeting is coming up on in March on the 15th, and that will be at Rutgers University, and we will be opening our registration on our website shortly. Wanted to ask everybody, now that 2025 is beginning, to consider joining or donating to the association. We do a lot of work. We're an all-volunteer group. But there are costs involved in doing what we do. So we would appreciate it if you would go to our website and join. If you're not a member, if you are a member, please renew. If you have renewed already, we thank you very, very much. And by the way, we have received a ton of renewals in this month. So we really, really appreciate that. We want to make sure that you know that we present these groups who speak to us, but we do not verify everything they say. And so their presentations are exclusively theirs, and they're intended for general information only. And if you need any personal specific information to your property or yourself, you should consult your own professionals. Finally, I wanted to wish everybody a happy, happy holiday, and thank our members, our donors, the donor foundations who supported us in an extraordinary way this year. And we also expanded our collaboration this year to a very, very high level. And we really appreciate those organizations that have worked with us. And I'm sure that from the outside looking in, you see so much collaboration going on between the Forestry Association and organizations that 10 years ago, you wouldn't even imagine them speaking. And now they're on the same webinars together and working towards common goals. So we really, really, really appreciate that. And without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Tricia Aspinwall of the Nature Conservancy, and she's going to share her screen. And there we go.
Okay. Good evening. As Rich said, my name is Tricia Aspinwall. I'm the Land Conservation Manager for the Nature Conservancy here in New Jersey. Thank you so much to Rich, Andy, and the New Jersey Forestry Association for having us here tonight. I prepared for this by watching many of your prior webinars, and the content is truly incredible. I'm honored to be here with my colleagues speaking with you all. With me tonight, I have Richard Dodds, who is the Northern Region Manager for the New Jersey Conservation Foundation. And we're also very lucky to have with us Peter Kelsky from the American Farmland Trust. So what we wanted to do to get started and get to know each other is do a quick 5-question poll to kind of inform our discussion. So hopefully everyone, Rich will launch the poll now. And we have 5 questions. There it is. Okay, so the first one we have, we'd like to know who you are, and which one best describes you. So would you best describe yourself as a private landowner, a farmer, forester, tree-related business, someone from a nonprofit? That would be me. Are you a government representative, consultant, or some other interested party? And Rich will let us know when that has reached a
Yeah,
critical
poll
mass.
is, everybody's still clicking in. It's
Great.
just starting to settle down a little bit.
Yeah.
And we are about there. And so we'll let everybody finish.
And
There
Rich, we
go.
hit 109 participants.
Yeah. So I will end the poll. And shall I share the results, Tricia?
Yes, please. Great. That's great. So most of the people we're talking to tonight are private landowners. That's what we're hoping for. Myself and my colleagues were hoping to reach many private landowners. And as I'll say later, we don't want to tell you what to do. It's your land, but I do want to tell you what you can do. So the next question is, we'd like to know if you're a private landowner, or even if you're not, what do you own?
I'm going to reopen the poll and go to the next one.
Thank you.
There we go. All righty.
So do you own a forest? Do you own a farm? I expect many of you have land that maybe is probably a mix of both. Some of you may be working on land that you're leasing from another landowner, or you, like me, you might just have a really nice backyard and wish you had a farm.
Okay, we're just about there. Beautiful. And there you go.
So we do have mostly woodland owners, although some have a mix of farm fields along with their woodland. And we have some people who, like me, sadly do not own their own forest, as much as we would like to. All right, so the next question would be, we're trying to get a sense of like what size, the people that we're talking to, what size property are you working? And the reason that we're doing this is because we're trying to, number one, as I said, reach as many landowners as we can, just so that we can let you know all of the options. Again, I'm not going to try to tell you what to do with your land,
You
but
ready?
I am ready.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay.
I'm
Sorry.
stalling.
I was holding my finger over the button. All righty.
We're trying to get a sense of who we're talking to so that we can be the best prepared to serve you, basically. We want to know our audience and what your needs are. So here we are with the size question. What is the size of the land you own or manage? If you got more than 200 acres, please call me on my cell phone.
Okay, we're pretty good on data.
Okay.
There you go.
Yep, that checks out. We go when we do our strategic planning, I typically go based on a average parcel size of about 50 acres, knowing that might be a smidge ambitious. This kind of verifies that.
Well, this tracks very closely to the FLA data,
Oh,
the farmland assessment data
yes.
in New Jersey for people with management plans. So it looks like a very good cross section.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. And we have our
Fourth
few more
poll.
questions.
Yeah, it's okay. This is all great.
Yeah. So have you ever considered preserving your land? And that would be yes, no, or maybe you already own preserved land, or maybe you're working on preserved land. Probably should have put a NA on there. Apologies.
Okay. Almost there. All right, we're looking good. And we'll end that poll and share those results.
Okay. I love that 8 of you are already on preserved land, about 10%, and a lot of you have considered it in the past, and that's exciting. And those who haven't, maybe we can convince you. But again, it's your property. You can do what you want. We're just here to give you the information. And to that end, our final question is geared towards what factors are most important to you when considering preservation options. Again, we want to know our audience. We want to know what your needs are. Are you most concerned about leaving a legacy for future generations, whether they're your own heirs or just in general? Or is it a purely financial consideration? Obviously, completely fine. Future management. Having a fast transaction is sometimes validly very important to people. And some of you, it's very important to you to preserve it, but also retain the right to use it, forest, farm it, or maybe some other reason. And we'd love to hear from you when we open it up later, what some of those other reasons are. Or, our contact information is going to be very easily available at the end of the presentation, and we all encourage you to reach out to us with any comments or questions. The whole point of this is for us to talk to more landowners like you guys.
This one just takes a little longer for people to get through.
Yeah.
A lot of choices.
Yeah.
So
We're definitely looking forward to digging into this data.
this data is going to be rather a bit more to figure out. It's not as easy
Yeah.
to summarize.
Yeah.
But I do appreciate everyone taking the time to respond because it's super helpful.
Yeah. Thank you.
All righty, I think we're in a couple more coming through. All right, pretty stable at this point. We'll end the poll and share the results.
Okay. Oh, yeah, this is a lot too. The most important are the green ones. Okay, so retaining the right to use your farm or woodland, very important in future management.
So leaving a legacy.
Oh, I missed that one. Yes, leaving the legacy. I love it.
All
That's
right.
what's most important to me, even though I'm not a large landowner myself. I like to do this work because I want to leave a legacy for not just my children, but, all future
Yeah.
generations.
To me, and I know you're going to speak about this, the speed and ease of the transaction response to me is so interesting because it's not predominantly important. So people want to get it done, but they're not worried about speed and ease as the principal driver, which
Yeah.
is really, really very positive thinking in these transactions. So this is very helpful.
It is very helpful. I'm glad you suggested to ask this question this way. I appreciate that. And again,
All
this will
right.
help us to.
Okay. So should we stop sharing this one, Tricia?
Yeah, we can stop sharing.
Okay. And then we will.
Yeah. So real quick again, my name is Trisha Aspinwall. I work for the Nature Conservancy here in New Jersey as a land conservation manager, which means I lead our protection work here in New Jersey, where we're protecting land in perpetuity for conservation purposes. I am very honored to be here with Richard Dodds from New Jersey Conservation Foundation. I'm going to start off by talking about why we should be preserving land and how we kind of go about the prioritization of that. And Richard is going to go into the real bones of like how we get it done. Like, what is this process going to look like? His presentation is phenomenal. You should definitely be here for that. And then Peter, we're very lucky to have him here to talk to us about farmland preservation, specifically the federal program. And I think a lot of us know a good bit about the state program, but I don't even know as much about the federal program as I did before I met Peter. And now I feel much more informed on that. So without further ado, let's get into it. All right. And again, thank you for all that data. We do appreciate that. So just a quick intro to the Nature Conservancy so you can know who you're talking to. The Nature Conservancy is a global organization dedicated to strategic conservation efforts in more than 80 countries and territories worldwide. Our mission is quite simple: to conserve the lands and waters on which all life depends. Because we as an organization are fortunate enough to work globally, we are setting very ambitious goals to help reverse climate change and biodiversity loss, including a goal to protect 1.6 billion land acres by 2030. Very huge goal. Obviously, that's going to take a lot of acres all over the place, but none of that is here why we're here today. Just background. Our work is also very local here at the chapter level, here in New Jersey, where we have been active for over 60 years and have preserved over 61,000 acres during that time. And we're here today to share some hopefully helpful information about retaining and protecting in perpetuity New Jersey's natural lands so that our forests have a chance to survive and thrive for future generations in the most densely populated state in the country. New Jersey's natural lands have been fragmented and disconnected by human development and are strained by a rapidly changing climate. Survival for many of these plant and animal species means having space for migratory and life cycle needs and depends on the ability to adapt to new suitable habitats. But barriers like roads, dams, and other structures can literally block their ability to live and thrive. So we're very focused on good quality habitat and connecting that habitat. Because New Jersey will reach build-out sometime this century, meaning that all land here in New Jersey is either developed or preserved. We feel that we must act quickly to prioritize, protect, and connect the most important places left in New Jersey so that nature can continue to thrive. So what do we mean by build-out? Again, build-out is when all lands are either developed or preserved. As of 2020 data, New Jersey is 1/3 preserved, a little more than 1/3 developed, and 29% is what we consider to be available. This is 1.4 million acres of available lands, and that's what I'd like you to keep in mind as we go through these trends. Land use from 1986 to 2020 has changed drastically in New Jersey. Urban spaces, which by definition here is any developed land, has increased by 31% from 86 to 2020. Forest land has decreased by 8%, wetlands decreased by 6%, and agricultural land decreased by 29%, or an estimated 377,000 acres of farmland. Meanwhile, New Jersey's population continues to increase. 2010 to 2020, we added 500,000 people in New Jersey, and growth and development, of course, must increase with it. Despite a slightly slowed pace from the rapid conversions of the early 2000s building boom, it has slowed a little bit. So what happens to that 1.4 million acres, or 29%, almost a third of New Jersey, if we do nothing? Fragmentation, disconnection, loss of ecosystem services such as filtering and storing drinking water, mitigating flooding, providing wildlife habitat, sequestering carbon, protecting air quality, and possibly most importantly, our supply of local food. Meanwhile, preservation efforts are decreasing statewide. And as I learned from your previous webinar, average woodland owners, ages over 65, and many of those decision makers are over 75, right, Rich? And there's often a lack of interested heirs to carry on the family forestry or farmland legacy. So TNC and our partners are very concerned about these trends and what our state will look like if we don't accelerate the pace of preservation. And real quick citation, all of this data in this slide and in the next 3 slides are in a fabulous report created by the New Jersey Conservation Foundation, the amazing Michelle Byers, who's at their helm for 25 plus years, maybe more. And I have links that newjerseyconservation.org/nature for all. So much great data in there. If you want to dig in, it's a great place. Okay. In this graphic of all of the magenta and, oh, don't get ahead of me. In this graphic, all the magenta and orange lands are available lands. Looking at these available lands visually is quite striking. My first thought is how the character of New Jersey would change if all of that land were to be converted to development, and how much infrastructure would be needed to support it. Roads, schools, utilities, etc. For me, I want to consider what kind of New Jersey I'm leaving to my children and future generations. And of course, in reality, not all of this can be preserved or developed, right? Let's clarify what we mean by available land. Available doesn't mean it's for sale, and it doesn't guarantee it's even developable property. Available lands are lands that are not developed, not preserved, but also are in private ownership with no deed restrictions preventing development. Many of these lands are probably owned by some of the great people in this group and are probably being stewarded just fine by you. But the question is, what happens after you? In the July webinar and in the advanced questions for tonight, many of you expressed concern about who will steward your lands in the future. So we're here tonight to present some options. I won't tell you what to do, but I will tell you what you can do. Generally tonight and in more detail, you can reach out to me, Richard, or Peter later. And of course, the other part is that we can't do it all, even if you were all willing to consider preservation. We do need some affordable housing, right? We have to prioritize our efforts, and we are using science-backed tools to prioritize the most important lands left to protect, specifically in the places we can't afford to lose them, defined by these, how we call iconic landscapes. We've identified these iconic landscape regions for the ecosystem that they're trying to protect, from the Delaware Bayshore to the Pine Barrens and the Atlantic Coast in South Jersey, and then Sourlands, Highlands, and Ridge and Valley in Central and North Jersey. In each of these iconic landscapes, we have a number of land trusts and governmental partners working to protect land, and many of them use the New Jersey Conservation Blueprint, which is the basis for a lot of this data and the prioritization models. They use that as a way to prioritize protection efforts using science-backed models. Looking deeper into each region, you can see that the Pine Barrens and the Highlands have the highest available lands. And again, you can look at this report online if you'd like to see more detail. When the available lands are broken down by land use, it's clear that the largest category of available lands is forested land, meaning that the foresters will make the decisions that foresters will make about their future impacts all of our futures here in New Jersey. So looking even more closely at the Ridge and Valley province, sorry about that. Looking even more closely at the Ridge and Valley province, where much of my work is focused, the problem/opportunity is even more apparent. 43% of the Ridge and Valley is available, neither developed nor preserved. 150,000 acres. What would happen if all of that were to be converted to development? That, that wonderful bucolic character of Sussex and Warren County, it would be lost. So, and why are the Appalachians important to me? At TNC, the Appalachians are one of our 4 global focal places, and the only one in North America, where we are investing our efforts to protect the most important landscapes. TNC is making an investment in our New Jersey Appalachians as one of our main priorities because we see this as the most important intact forests for connectivity, but also the region that is most vulnerable to fragmentation. We use the New Jersey Conservation Blueprint to prioritize of these available lands, which are the most important for ecosystem sustainability. The Appalachians contain the largest remaining tracts of temperate broadleaf mixed forest in the world. Hundreds of natural communities are embedded within these forests, ranging from vast wetlands to alpine summits. The Apps are one of the most biologically rich of all temperate areas on the planet, providing habitat for almost 20,000 species. I'm telling you guys, like you don't know. You all know this better than I do, I'm sure. But over half the people in North America live within a day's drive of the region's protected areas. And there's a lot of development pressure from urban encroachment, energy development, pollution, industrial forestry, and extensive fragmentation. For New Jersey's 2030 goals, we will be focusing protection in places that will ensure our lands will be resilient and connected. While the Appalachians only covers a small part of our state, to contribute to our organizational goal of conserving 5 million acres in the Appalachians, we have a significant obligation to ensure that pinch point in New Jersey is well protected, healthy, and connected, and we have committed to contribute to the protection of 10,000 acres here by 2030. Like me, I have to work on 10,000 acres. So please, if you have 200 acres, please call me. But you know, we want to convince you why it's smart to work with us and why we're doing this work, why it means a lot to us. So back to that pinch point, let's look at this fun video. So jumping back to a continental perspective, you can see how our state fits into the larger biodiversity picture. We have had a 70% decline in species populations since 1970. We've had extinctions driven by habitat loss from deforestation, land use changes, and climate change. 75% of global food crops rely on pollinators, and our forests filter 40% of the water for the world's largest cities. And these species are in decline everywhere. But looking at it again, you can at the continental migration patterns, you can see why New Jersey is a critical piece on a continental scale for species along the Atlantic Flyway and the Appalachians especially. Our Apps and our Pine Barrens contain the largest areas of intact forests. Okay. Unfortunately, research has shown that species are not thriving in North America. Species abundance levels are way down. I'm not going to go into detail there, but I can point you toward all of that research if you're interested. To retain species diversity, we must identify and preserve lands that have the characteristics needed for plant and animal species to adapt in the face of a changing climate. TNC's Dr. Mark Anderson, Center for Landscape Conservation Science, predicts that species are moving north and west. His resilient and connected network lands are those identified to be climate resilient because the data shows that they have the characteristics to be able to support the adaptations that plant and animal species are likely to need as the climate changes. We can adequately conserve a variety of connected microclimates. We can conserve nature's stage by allowing space for species to adapt. And again, fragmentation is a threat to these connected landscapes. In a home rule state, there's very little coordinated planning. Development and the rateable chase often cause situations that create conflict for the most appropriate land use. Housing developments have slowed a bit, but warehouse pressure is intense, and local governments are working hard to balance budgets in this economy. So we have to work hard, and us here in this field have to work hard to identify the most important lands left to preserve in a connected landscape while we have the opportunity. So what you're seeing here is how TNC has used New Jersey Conservation Blueprint models to closely evaluate these focal landscapes. We look closely at not only the science, but all ability to development and opportunities for preservation when we have a landowner that's willing. Zooming into the New Jersey Appalachians and Bobcat Alley, you can see clearly how our state plays an important role in species movement on that continental scale. New Jersey is an important pinch point, not just in the Alps, also in the Pine Barrens and the Atlantic Flyway. For the longer migrations and our road network, fragmentation threatens even the smallest migration patterns. For example, salamanders crossing the roads to fulfill their lifestyle needs, and bobcats, our cute and fuzzy mascot, also need large ranges to fulfill their needs, but they're also an umbrella species. When we protect bobcat habitat, it also protects the habitat of many other species, from bears to butterflies. And we can also do more than just land protection to advance habitat connectivity goals. We have the ability to create safe road, bridge, culvert crossings for species by proactively planning with a regional lens for places that both people and species can thrive without being on top of each other. And to that end, we at TNC have a policy team that's working with our New Jersey legislators to enact policies to improve wildlife crossings, creating connections for species movement safely through roads and other dangerous spots. So wrapping up my section here, there are many significant stresses on our natural systems. The conversion of natural lands for development continues to fragment our landscapes and diminish habitats. Yet there is no single more pressing threat to our natural systems currently than climate change. To adapt to a changing climates, again, plants and animals are shifting their distributions to find new suitable conditions that will allow them to persist. This process often takes generations to occur, but this climate is changing faster than in any time in human history, and adapting to a changing climate is made even more challenging due to fragmentation. So it's like a self-imposing cycle here, and we got to stop the cycle. So as we approach that final few decades of land protection work in New Jersey before we reach build out, we will be focusing our protection in places that will ensure that our lands will be resilient and connected. While the Appalachians only covers a small portion of our, I already said that part. Sorry, and not having the best luck with this PowerPoint. And just to wrap up my part here, our vision in this work, TNC's vision, is to protect a connected landscape of climate resilient lands. And protecting lands in Bobcat Alley for us and throughout the state with our partners will provide a healthy corridor for plant and animal species to migrate, linking the most vital lands to our lands in other states. And hopefully I have convinced you as to the why. Now I'm going to hand it over to Richard to tell you about the how we can get this done together.
Great, thank you, Tricia. And you'll notice in the questions, Clark Beebe has asked a great question about sort of what are some of the causes of the forest issues. So with that said, TNC brings us a lot of great science and talks about really the issues that are going on and why we need to do it. So I'm going to get to the nuts and bolts of actually making it happen. So I talk about open space preservation. I'm Richard Dodds with New Jersey Conservation Foundation, and I'm the Northern Regional Manager, which means everything from Route 1 north is my territory. It's a small area. Nobody lives there. Yeah, I'm sure you don't barely notice it at all. But when we look at open space preservation, I like to talk about desire and opportunity, because that really describes sort of how we go about it. So when we talk about desire, if we go to the next slide, and I'm going to rely on Trish and her hopefully not so sticky button this time, we will ask ourselves, how do we know that people want to preserve natural lands? And the way we find that out is, in a very rare occasion, people vote themselves a municipal open space tax. Municipalities do it. Or in the next button, county open space tax trust fund. We know the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection, the Green Acres program preserves lots of land. If we keep going down the list, the State Agricultural Development Committee, the SADC, and finally, we're going to hear more about from Peter later, is the USDA Natural Resource Conservation Service, or NRCS. And the Agricultural Conservation Easement Program helps landowners, land trusts, and other entities protect, restore, and enhance wetlands or protect working farms and ranches through conservation easements. And as I said, Peter will talk much more about that later. So let's hop on to the next slide. So who wants to preserve their property? And so we are not an entity that can go out and say, we want your property. We want people to voluntarily come to us or demonstrate to us that they are looking to sell property. So we ask ourselves, who wants to sell their property? And when we do that, we go to all the usual places. We go to Zillow, Realtor.com, you name it. We look at road signs along the roads. We make calls to state and county township officials, calls to other nonprofits. Word of mouth, we hear that somebody's, looking, they want to get out of farming or they're looking to preserve a portion of their property. And we just have conversations. We start talking to people. As we move on from a property owner's perspective, we ask questions like, what do you want to do? Most people have some idea of where they'd love to see their property in the future. I'm an owner of land. I have a small piece of property in New Jersey and a larger piece of property in Nova Scotia. It is, as I like to say to some of my friends, it's the greatest memorial to my dad. It's 150 acres of forest that he has done silviculture on, and his ashes are up there, and it's part of the family, and it will be that way forever if I have my choice. But what do you see as the future of the lands that you own? Are there members of the family who want to continue the management of the property? Are there folks that have that same passion as you do? Is their property a financial investment or a place that you have a deep bond with? Some people buy land and they're looking to sell it, a few years later and make some, it's a financial thing. Others buy land and really have a deep connection with it. And what's your dream for the lands you own? And do you have a plan in place for your property? And usually what people at the end, when we ask that question, go, I don't know, we'll see what happens. And we're here to help you work through that process and hopefully get you in a place where you've got a good plan that may or may not include preservation, but at least you have a plan. If we go to the next slide. So as a conservation organization, we have a role in this. First, when somebody calls us, and we get lots of calls of people who want to donate their 3 acres of land that's pretty much all wetlands in the middle of a development. So we ask ourselves, does the property make sense? Where's the property? Is it sitting in a targeted area, or is it sort of a disconnected small piece out in the middle of nowhere? Is it in an agricultural development area? Is it in the highlands? Is it in Bobcat Alley, etc.? Is the site near an already preserved property? So if you have land that's next to you that's already preserved, it makes a lot of sense to want to continue that preservation. And how large is it? We can spend, and we have spent, a considerable amount of time and money on properties that make sense that aren't very big, that are 10 acres, 5 acres, that are connector pieces. And we've spent a lot of time on properties that are considerably larger, but they make sense to us. So from a conservation organization's perspective, if the property makes sense, we want to engage with the owners. Okay. If we keep going, no, you're doing great. She's anticipating my every move. Thank you, Tricia. How quickly we ask these questions. And one of the first things I ask and tell sellers is if you need the money immediately, this program is probably not for you. So we want to understand how quickly does a seller want to sell. Some have, no particular time in mind. Some have, a year or two. If you need the money for tomorrow, again, this is not the program for you. Next bullet. And what are we buying? And this is what is sort of confusing to some folks. Are we doing a fee simple purchase, essentially pay for the property in its entirety? All rights and everything that's on the property is paid for. or something a little less. An easement, a purchase of some attribute of the property, typically development or conservation easements are what we're talking about here. And it's just an attribute of the property. Okay, if we go on. And oh, last one on there. Well, I just missed it. Go back. Yeah. How are we going to pay for it? So one of the key pieces in the land acquisition is, how are you going to pay for it? We don't expect the seller to reduce a price on a piece of land that is at market value because we don't have enough money. You may volunteer to do that, but it's our job to come up with the money to buy your property. It's not something that you have to figure out. It's something we have to figure out. Okay, now on to the next slide. So from the property owner's perspective, it's always, how soon do I need / get the money? That's, for some folks who are really planning ahead, this is not a question for them. They're really more concerned about the next bullet, which is, how much is it worth? Because what it's worth to you as the owner and how much it's worth on the market may be two very different things. So how much is it worth? And the way we go through that process is, and I'll be talking about this later, is we use an objective standard. We don't try and say, well, I'll give you X for it. We go through an appraisal process and the appraisers tell us what's the market value. So we're not trying to work out the best deal possible. We're working out something that works for you and works for us. Go ahead. Do I care what the next owner does with the property? And this is from the polling. That's one of the biggest issues that I see. Many of you ranked very high. Just, how much control will I have once this isn't mine anymore? So in that process, you want to be looking at what's in the, again, devils are in the details. What is allowed and how much control do I want? And what do I have to do? What do I have to do as the property owner to go through this process? Do I have to do tons and tons of work, or is it essentially the basics, like selling a house? I provide some information and the rest goes on from there. So we're going to try and go in. And what is the process? Where do we start? What's sort of the middle? Where the end? What's the timelines on that process? Is this, something that takes a long, long time? Typically, just so you know, I've done as short as 12 months and as long as 5 years. There may be one that's on the edge of 6 right now. So there's everything in between. The majority, if you talk to SADC, they'll say the majority are in 18 months. And that's about the same for Green Acres, when there's really no major issues in the property. All right, next one. So the conservation organization process. What's the process? The process of purchasing a property or an easement on the property are very similar, except that easements don't require environmental inspection. So, and we'll get into more of that, and I'm sure Peter will too, on the whole concept of easements. So going down next, appraisals. One or more independent approved appraisers inspect the property and review what comparable properties like this one has sold for in the past. We call them comps. And these, just a note on the appraisers, is that these are not state employees. They are their own businesses that the state have said they meet the basic requirements. They provide reports that meet the basic requirements necessary for a complete appraisal. They're independent appraisers. Next thing comes up is an agreement to sell. Before you get to this point, you'll have been given a set of numbers. There's those numbers reflect what's called the CMV, the certified market value of the property. And you'll either be given an option agreement, so to continue on the process, or a contract. At any point in this process, you can say, it's not enough money, I'm not interested. And it hasn't cost you a cent to get here. So it's something to think about. If you're just trying to understand what the value of the property is, we can give you a general value, but as we move ahead, we can get we're paying the appraisers to give us a very specific value. Next up, title. We want to make sure that the seller actually owns the property, and if there are any limitations on its use. This is when old easements come up. It's when you find out that your sister's uncle's brother didn't really pay for some portion, or should have received some portion of the property. It's all those things come out in the title piece. Next up, survey. You may think you own a lot of property, but this is exactly where the property is located. I actually did a property where on the tax map, it said it was 29 acres, and it came out it was 19 acres. And it was just an error that was repeated year after year after year. So this gets to where the property is located and the size of the property in acres. The important piece on that is that the size is, what you typically get is a per acre price. So if you have more acres, you get a little bit more money. If you have less acres, you get less. The process of purchasing property easement, again, we'll keep going on. Environmental review. So this is, again, for fee simple purchases, some sort of preliminary assessment report. It's done by people who do this all day long. The physical determination of the potential environmental contaminants that could or do exist on the property. This is looking at old junkyards. Every farm that I grew up with when I was a kid had a spot where they dumped a lot of stuff. That's, in farms, that's typical. In forests, I've gone through some beautiful forests. The only thing you'll find is a 1930s Chevy that somebody drove out there eons ago, and it now has trees growing through it. So there's everything in between. And we're just trying to find out what are the potential liabilities are. And finally, let's go, oh boy, that jumpy key there. Fund the purchase. So this is the conservation organization is doing. It's looking at the cost for all the items above. So the environmental review, the appraisal, the title, the agreement, the legal, all that's covered by the conservation organization, and at no cost to the seller. The buyer then has to find the funds, us, the conservation organizations, has to find the funds to pay for the property. It's not your job to do that as the seller. Go ahead. So the seller's process. You're going to have to answer some questions for the appraisers, and if you get environmental review, there's some questions there too. What do you know that's been on the property? But the appraiser's questions are pretty straightforward too. Sign the agreement to sell for either fee simple or agreement or easement or not. If you don't feel like you're in control and this is not working for you, it's not feeling comfortable, stop the process, get comfortable with it, and come back again. We rather have you comfortable with the process than just feeling like the whole thing is moving out of your control. So, or not is a fair answer to give. Allow access for survey and, if needed, environmental review. The folks need to get out there to measure where your land is. That's simple enough. Be patient at first, then call repeatedly and ask where your check is. What happens is the old adage, the squeaky wheel. So if all these things have moved along and suddenly nothing's happening, call and find out why. Because the more you call, the more there's a certain incentive to keep the process moving along. And with that said, we're going to take a look at Farmland Preservation New Jersey from American Farmland Trust. Peter, you're up.
Richard, thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. So for my portion of the presentation, I'm going to be, focusing a little bit on farmland preservation in New Jersey in general, and then like Tricia and Richard said, towards the end, I'll focus more specifically on the federal farmland preservation program and why that program may provide a solution for forest landowners to protect their land, forest and farmland owners. So Tricia, starting on the first one, just kind of a brief introduction of American Farmland Trust. Folks obviously very familiar, I think, with the Nature Conservancy and New Jersey Conservation Foundation. The American Farmland Trust, We have been around for a long time. We have a well-established presence in New York State, but we've only recently, as of this year, sort of moved into New Jersey. So just to give folks a bit of background of what we are and what we're trying to achieve. So at American Farmland Trust, we like to say our mission is to save the land that sustains us. And we do that by protecting farmland, by promoting good environmentally sound farming practices, and by keeping farmers on the land. So we're a national agricultural land trust. We've been around for around 40 years, helping farmers and ranchers to maintain and preserve or protect their land. We like to say we take a holistic approach to agriculture because we focus on the land, the agricultural practices that are actually occurring on the land, and then also the farmers who actually end up working the land. And lastly, we also say that we work from kitchen table to Congress, and all that really means, thanks, Risha, all that really means is we will work directly with farmers, providing direct support, but we will also work on bigger issues such as national agricultural policy affecting change in the upcoming Farm Bill, for example. Thanks, Risha. So I just wanted to highlight a few examples of some of the regional and national programs that our organization provides, or that we have. I won't go into any detail about any of these, but just to kind of give folks an idea of the wide range of programs that we have to support farmers and farming in the nation. Then on to the next one. Specifically in New Jersey, what is American Farmland Trust doing in New Jersey or trying to achieve in New Jersey? So we have two main programs in the state: farmland protection side of our work, which is of course the work that I do. So this is a partnership with the NRCS to protect more of the farmland in the state via the Federal Farmland Preservation Program. So what American Farmland Trust does, or AFT, we identify opportunities for preservation. We will conduct outreach. This is what I'm doing right now, informing landowners about the program and the opportunities available for them to protect their land through this federal program. And then we will also, yeah.
Could you just tell people what NRCS is? We've used that term a few times and some folks may not know.
Sure. Yeah. And I think Richard briefly mentioned as well. So NRCS is the USDA, US Department of Agriculture, Natural Resources Conservation Service. Thank you, Rich. And so what we will also do as part of this process of trying to get more farmland protected through the NRCS's program is we will also provide technical support. So any applications that come through the door, we will help folks. We will handhold all the way through the process and try and push things through and get folks compensation for protecting their land. The other program in New Jersey I just wanted to highlight that is relevant to folks who might be listening in is our Smart Solar program. And this is actually a training program that we are developing in partnership with Rutgers, training farmers in New Jersey how to farm around solar panels, right? Agrivoltaics, incorporating solar with farming. And we see it as a means of improving viability, providing an extra source of income. So I will just mention that we completed some of the training sessions quite recently, and we're hoping to extend that program, and we're planning to extend that training into next year. So any folks interested to find out more about that, certainly feel free to reach out. Then next up, the big question: why are we trying to protect New Jersey's farmland? Now, this might be pretty obvious to everybody on the call, but I feel like it's worthwhile just pointing out some of the important points. Why are we working to protect farmland in New Jersey? So of course, we are the most densely populated state in the nation, right? It's a lot of people in not such a big area. So as some of my other participants or co-presenters have pointed out, there is intense development pressure in this state, things like warehouse development, residential subdivisions, right? Our organization published a study a couple of years ago that showed undercurrent development scenarios. If development continues the way it is continuing in the state right now, New Jersey is projected to lose around 125,000 acres of farmland by 2040 in the next 15 years. We only have a little bit over 700,000 acres of farmland in the state. So if we do not do more, just like Tricia and Richard have said, if we do not do more to protect farmland, we do stand to lose a lot of farmland in the state quite soon. Then also something quite interesting, there's often reference made to what's called this critical mass of farmland that needs to be maintained in the state to support the agricultural industry, the viability of the ag industry. and also all the other services that depend on it, right? So we want to maintain around 500,000 acres, or we need to maintain around 500,000 acres of farmland in the state, just to make sure that the agricultural industry as a whole can survive, and then all these other services that are dependent on it can survive as well. So, you know, the guy who sells the tractors, the guy who fixes the farm equipment, the machinery, the vet that treats the sick cows, right? If the farms don't exist in the state anymore, these other services are either going to go out of business or they're going to move out of state. Then local food security, this is something that I'm hearing about more and more and more, right? We want to ensure that everyone has access to fresh and nutritious food across the state. And then lastly, something you will often hear in the circle that you know, we tend to work in is we need to keep the garden in the garden state, right? It's not the garden state without the garden. So I just wanted to highlight some of the other benefits of preservation. And again, this list is not exhaustive, but some of the things that I just like to point out, you know, especially as a landowner, what's one of the biggest benefits of preservation, other than knowing your land is protected forever, is it provides a source of income to a landowner, right? As a landowner, you receive compensation for protecting your land. It helps improve viability, which we know is one of the greatest challenges for farming in New Jersey. And then along with that, another benefit of preservation is not just protecting the agricultural land itself or the farm use of the land, but also protecting this productive agricultural soil for the future, and then all the other conservation values that comes with that, right? A farm is not just a farm, it is also often wildlife habitat. It's a way of improving water quality or protecting water quality. So preservation helps protect all those other conservation values as well. Now, another big benefit of preservation is it'll actually make land more affordable. We know that one of the big challenges for new and beginning farmers is that land is too expensive for them to get into farming. So preservation, I will explain that in a little bit, does tend to reduce the value, the fair market value of the land, which makes it more affordable for new and beginning farmers and the next generation to get into farming. So that's another sort of added benefit of preservation. And then lastly, something I like to say is it helps keep rural areas rural, which I feel is very important. So just highlighting some of the major challenges, and again, this list is not exhaustive either, but some of the major challenges with trying to protect farmland in New Jersey. Firstly, we have a lot of competition from developers. What I mean by that in terms of preservation is developers can often offer more dollars per acre. They can pay more to have the land developed than preservation pays. So for example, as a landowner, preservation, you might get paid, for argument's sake, $5,000 an acre to protect your land. A developer might come along and offer you $15,000 an acre, right? So that's a difficult choice for some folks to make. So just know that that is a challenge. And then there are some folks who do have incorrect perceptions about preservation. You know, some people might think that when you do protect your land, the government takes over your land and you can't utilize your land as you did before. You can't continue hunting or fishing your land or you know, managing the forest. And again, that's sort of an incorrect perception that some folks have, but that is certainly one of the reasons why we do not have more farmland or land protected in general. But with that, there are, of course, opportunities to protect additional farmland in the state. New Jersey has actually done an amazing job of protecting farmland. You know, we are pretty much the national leader in terms of percentage of farmland protected in the state. However, there is still a lot of good quality farmland to be protected. And another big advantage in New Jersey is there's substantial funding available at the federal level, but also at the state and local levels. Often in a lot of states, a lack of funding is one of the biggest barriers for preservation. We do not generally have that problem in New Jersey. So that is a really big plus. And then just lastly, highlighting that organizations such as the Nature Conservancy and New Jersey Conservation Foundation, American Farmland Trust, and many other partners and nonprofits, other organizations, the state, the federal government are all committed to preserving the land and working with landowners to help them protect their land. So Richard touched a little bit on it. what is a conservation easement? A lot of folks might be familiar with what this means, but some folks might not be. What is a conservation easement, right? A conservation easement is how we protect land. And so it's a legal agreement between a landowner and a government or conservation organization, such as a land trust, to help them permanently protect their property. Pretty straightforward legal agreement between the landowner and the entity of the conservation organization to protect their land. So how does a conservation easement actually protect land? Well, the conservation easement contains or comes with voluntary restrictions that will limit development and non-agricultural activity in the case of agricultural easements. And so things such as subdivision, the amount of times you can subdivide your property, the number of dwellings you can build on your property, those are the kind of things that will be limited. That's how we protect the property. The conservation easement might also contain restrictions or prohibit certain practices that could harm the agricultural use or the use of the land in general, such as mining, right? You probably can't end up mining on your property if the property is protected. It makes sense. So how does that conservation easement help the landowner? Well, again, the landowner receives compensation for giving up those development rights. So you as the landowner, because you are giving up the right to build a bunch of additional dwellings on your property, or you're giving up the right to subdivide your property in the future, you will receive compensation for doing so. And the bonus here is you retain ownership, right? You do not lose ownership of your property. You can still lease your property, you can sell it, you can transfer your property. And the big benefit, the big picture here with the conservation easement, it is a permanent protection on the property. It ensures that the farmland is protected in perpetuity, right? If it's not protected permanently, what is the point? So just briefly kind of running through the farmland preservation process. And I know Richard, went into a lot of good information about preservation, but just essentially highlighting a few points. So firstly, we identify a parcel based on factors such as, soil quality, the size of the parcel, right? My colleagues here have referred to, bigger parcels or what is more desirable to protect. Parcels that are already next to preserved land tends to be more desirable, right? The ideal goal is to protect these large unbroken pieces of open space or farmland. And so those are the kind of parcels that we identify. And then an application would be submitted to the NRCS or to the State Agricultural Development Committee or the SADC. They usually get a bunch of applications, and those applications will be reviewed and ranked, and then the top applications will be selected for funding. Then following that, there is usually a site visit to document what's called the baseline conditions, right? What does the property look like before it is protected? And Richard mentioned appraisal. So there's an appraisal done to determine what's called the easement value. And I'm going to explain what an easement value is in just a second. And then after that, the landowner will receive compensation right at the end equal to the easement value. And the last step usually is the entity that holds the easement, usually a land trust, will conduct annual monitoring. And all that means is once a year, someone will come visit your property, walk around, take a few photos, and make sure that everything's still as it should be. So easement valuation, very simple. The easement value is the difference between the value of your property before and after it is protected. Okay, so let's say this example, argument's sake, right now, your land, your property is worth $1 million. Once you protect your property, I mentioned that you give up these development rights. So because you are reducing the development potential of the property, you can't subdivide it a bunch of times, you can't build a bunch of houses, it will actually reduce the market value of your property. So before preservation, the property is worth $1 million. Once you protect it, your property is only worth $700,000 in this example. That $300,000 difference, that is the easement value, and that is where you, as the landowner, will receive for protecting your land. Very cool. All right. So, as we've mentioned, there are these two sort of main farmland preservation programs in the state. In New Jersey, we have the Federal Farmland Preservation Program, and we have the state, or the SADC's Farmland Preservation Program, right? I just wanted to highlight a couple sort of similarities between these programs. There are a lot of similarities. There are quite a few differences, especially in terms of eligibility criteria, but just a few points I wanted to highlight, especially for owners of forested parcels in terms of these two programs. The federal program administered by the NRCS, it allows you to have up to 2/3 of the easement area or 2/3 of your parcel to be forested, right? So approximately 67% of your property can be forest, and you would be eligible. With the state's program, depending on the size of the parcel, but generally, for parcels over about 10 acres, 50% or 25 acres of the property should be tillable. Tillable, my understanding is that's land that is available for crops or has recently been used for crop production or livestock. And then the important point here is both programs allow forest management and timber harvesting, and generally as long as it is done in accordance with recognized best management practices. So I think that's an important point to remember for forest landowners. And then just the benefit of having these two different programs, it does provide landowners with options. It's kind of what Tricia was saying. It's good for landowners to have options. You might have a parcel that is not eligible for one program, but you might be eligible for another. So it's good to have these options. And then just for us, folks who work in this space, the great thing about having a federal and a state farmland preservation program is there are certain cases where these programs can work together, especially in terms of combining funds, protecting really large pieces of open space or farmland where we need extra funds. It's good to know that these programs can work together. So on to the next one. I just wanted to go into a little bit more detail about the federal farmland preservation program. And again, how that program could be beneficial to forest landowners. So the federal program has a really long name. Don't worry about trying to remember it, but basically it is known as the Agricultural Conservation Easement Program, Agricultural Land Easements, or ASAP-AL. And again, this is a voluntary program to permanently protect eligible farmland. Some folks might be familiar with the previous program, the Farm and Ranch Lands Protection Program, or FRPP. So this ASAP-AL program replaces some of those previous NRCS programs. And how it works is the NRCS will provide matching funds up to 50% of the easement value. So using the example I showed earlier, if your easement value is $300,000, the NRCS would provide 50%, so they would provide $150,000. And then something called the eligible entity, which would be a state or local government, a land trust, or an Indian tribe, will provide the non-federal matching funds. So the other $150,000 will come from this eligible entity, and who would also hold and monitor and enforce the easement. Right, so I'm not going to go into the weeds too much about eligibility. I will say this: if any folks on this call are interested in finding out if their property would be eligible, feel free to reach out, and I can certainly review your parcel information. But generally, to be eligible for the Federal Farmland Preservation Program, ideally a parcel would have at least 50% prime or other important soils. B and C, if a parcel protects grazing uses and related conservation values, that's generally more applicable out west. If the parcel contains historical or archaeological resources that would need to be in a state or federal register, or if the parcel furthers a state or local farmland protection policy. I won't go into detail about that. All that essentially means in New Jersey, if the parcel does not contain any prime or other important soils, there is this potential alternative eligibility pathway, as long as the parcel is located with an agricultural development area. Okay, so just a few other things to consider if people are thinking about or considering preservation, especially through the federal program. Property must be farm or ranch land, right? It can't be just a residential or a commercial lot. It must be farm or ranch land. Doesn't necessarily mean you should have to be actively farming it right now. The land could be fallow for a very good reason, but it must be farm or ranch land. You need to have records with the Farm Service Agency. And although you can have some forest on the property, right, your property cannot be completely covered in forest. The land also must be accessible from a public roadway. So I mentioned earlier that once a year, someone needs to come and visit your property, needs to come and conduct monitoring and walk around your property. they need to be able to access the property. So even if your property is not directly accessible or next to or adjacent to a road, even if it's through a deeded right of way, the property must be accessible. Now, also something to consider is that the property cannot be already protected by a similar easement, right? If it's already protected under an easement, for example, through the state program, you can't then go ahead and protect it again through the federal farmland preservation program. So just something to keep in mind. And although the federal farmland preservation program is trying to protect farmland and agricultural activity and agricultural use, just know that there are certain agricultural activities through the program that might be prohibited or restricted, specifically things such as ball and burlap style nursery operations, sod farming, because of the perceived impact on soil disturbance of these farming or agricultural activities. Just know that not all agricultural activity is necessarily going to be allowed through the federal program. And then Richard also went into detail about the fact that these processes can take some time, right? It can take an average of 18 to 24 months to close, sometimes a little sooner if you're very lucky, but quite often much longer. And I'm going to quote Richard here by saying that, you know, although it is sometimes challenging to protect your land, it is often frustrating. It is not a straightforward process necessarily. It can be done. And then just lastly, kind of a recap highlighting why the Federal Farmland Preservation Program can provide a good option for forest landowners to protect their land. Once again, you can have forests on up to 2/3 of the parcel. Forest management and timbering, you can continue timber harvesting and forest management. There might be some restrictions in terms of maybe no clear cutting, or you might have to have riparian buffers established, but for the most part, generally, as long as you're following best management practices, forest management and timber harvesting can continue. There is, again, substantial funding available for owners of eligible parcels. And although, you know, ideally a parcel would have good productive agricultural soils, there is, through the federal program and legislation in New Jersey, this sort of potential alternative pathway for parcels that do not meet that soils requirement, which is kind of a good thing, as long as the parcel is within an agricultural development area. And then just lastly, worth mentioning, the Federal Farmland Preservation Program, there is no minimum parcel size. So whether your parcel is 5 acres or 500 acres, it could be eligible. Thank you very much.
Okay. Just to wrap things up, you might be wondering why 3 of us from different organizations are working together, because we can accomplish more by working together. And we've all come together because we work together on something I am in the infancy stages of developing called the New Jersey Appalachians Coalition, where we are working together to provide, in this particular geography, a one-stop shop for landowners to come and get more information about what is the best option for them. Reach out to any of us and we will coordinate with our partners and find the best solution for your particular situation. Obviously, we can't answer those questions today, but that's what we're trying to do in one particular geography. That being said, Nature Conservancy is statewide. Richard's organization works statewide, and Peter also, we all have statewide missions. We might not individually be buying land in every part of the state, but we always know someone who is. So the point is, we will work together to connect you with someone who can help you if we can't help you ourselves. And that's the point, to be collaborative. And we hope this year to hold a series of landowner outreach events where we are in person with anyone who's interested in learning more about this process, just like we did tonight, just in person. And with that, we have one more slide from Richard to just tell you how we want to help you.
So thanks, Tricia. You know, we're here to meet with you, provide more detail and explanation of the process. You know, this is a fairly short course. This is the very short course in this process. We're there to discuss options specific to your situation. everybody's different. Every piece of land is different, every ownership. And as we all know, family dynamics are all different. So we're there to help you through the process, gather possible funding partners and draft applications for your approval, meet with nonprofits, key municipal and county staff, government agencies, and others with you or on your behalf, access other professionals when needed, and create the team that will support you from start to finish. We, even in those long haul processes, but even if we're at it for 4 to 5, 6 years, we don't let people go unless you choose to back off and not do it. We're there to help you through the entire process. Our organizations have been around for quite a while. We've been doing this for, I don't know how many years. And we're there to help you from start to finish. You just have to feel comfortable all the way through. Now, when Peter and Tricia were talking, I was looking at, we had some great questions here. Some of them we can probably answer tonight. Some of them are real head scratchers and great questions to ask. So, Rich, tell us how you want to do this. You're muted. Rich, Kelsky, you're muted.
I have the list of questions here from the registrations, which you all have. And if we just start at the top of that list, there's a few that I think are really more nuts and bolts. People got a good overview of why preservation and some of the details, but so let's start at the top, which talks about options for preservation as green space. Put that aside what the terminology is, but options for preservation when there are no heirs. That is a concern that many people have. They either have no heirs or they have family that's not interested in managing a forest property, or their children have moved out of state and they've put their life in the property. And they want to look for a solution that gives a bit of a legacy to them for what they created and also preserves the land the way they had hoped to preserve it. And I think one of the key things that I picked up from you folks, and maybe it wasn't exactly said, which is every easement is different. Every land is different, every person is different, and every easement is different. And so from my perspective, I think a lot of the process that you're describing, Richard, is people learning that nobody's going to hand them a sheet of paper that says, this is easement 1, version 1, this is what we're going to do. Your lands are all different. There could be some wetlands on your property. There could be forest land. There could be agricultural land. And everything has a detail and an adjustment to it. And so I think that's some of the things that has to be, people have to understand when they do this. And also when they do this process, while I do think that they put themselves a bit in your hands, they should also, in my view, this would be my experience, is to retain their own counsel and negotiate the transaction so that the easement is not misinterpreted or misunderstood in any way, and that all the parties involved understand the components. That's to me critical. So do you have any points on the process a little bit? Like, how does the process start, Richard? Maybe you can, I know you said you find a property, but let's say you have someone on this call who has, let's make it real simple, 100 acres, beautiful forest property, happens to be in Bobcat Alley, and Trish is interested in that. And what happens?
Well, it starts with a conversation.
Okay.
It always starts with a conversation. And it's a conversation is less about, the details of the property and more about individuals and what they want to do and how long they've lived there and what's their tie to the land. And it really gets to because from that, we can understand what direction to give you some insight to go to. The more control you're willing to give up, the more financial reimbursement you're going to get. However, feeling about having a connection with the land and really wanting to figure out where it's going, it isn't as simple as there's just one way. There's lots of ways. One of the questions that came up was, I think in the piece, was about a life estate. What happens if somebody wants to stay on their land? They don't have any children to deliver to, whatever. But they're, they would more than anything else, they want to be able to stay in their land till they die. And we have done that type of arrangements for many, many folks who just stay in their land. After they die, it becomes part of a public land piece that, and their house is either, if it's in good condition, it's sold as a severable portion, or it's, the house is taken down and the whole property becomes one giant park. Or there's lots of other options that can occur. So that's why it's a long conversation to start with. And
I think it would be good for people also to have thought about it and talk to their family members about it before they even start the conversation, so they have some ideas. What are the interests of the different members of the family, and where do they want to take it, and where do they see themselves in 10 years or 15 years? And the other thing that I think is important is when you discuss the length of this process, people should be building this process into their life plan. It shouldn't be an emergency solution to some problem. If you can't work your property anymore, yes, that's an emergency. But we should all be planning to age out of certain activities and certain things, and that's where these transactions can be very helpful to people in planning their future, their best years without maybe the burden of doing something. I do have a question for you though. Do you tend more towards easements or more towards fee transactions?
Wow, we do both. We do so many, and really it's customized to the individual. We realized that to hit the land goals that we'd like to see for this state, another 500,000 acres by 2050, that we have to look at every option. We have done everything from recent property that I did was a connector between two large public properties, and they had a house in the front and number of acres to the back, and all we really wanted to do is to connect those two properties, and we did a purchase of a small portion in the back to allow that conveyance, so you could start in one property, publicly accessible property, and have a trail that went to the other one, and it connected a 70-acre property with a 20-acre property with a small 6-acre piece in the back, and that's all we were looking for. So it really gets down to what are people interested in doing. I find the best conversations I've had is walking with individuals on their property and understanding it from their perspective.
Yep. And what's the history and their life there and what they've done.
Absolutely.
It's interesting. There's a question which I'm not going to encourage us to answer specifically, which just came up, but it's a very specific question about the severability of a home from a property and access. And this is exactly what you're talking about, Richard, that you can't have this conversation with yourself in a vacuum. You have to engage with the organizations that are out there, and maybe more than one organization, and have conversations and see what the ideas are and how that fits into their plan for your area, for adjacent properties. You may not realize that your property might be accessible from another property and could easily be attached to it, like you're talking about with that small piece. So yeah, I mean, this is what it's about, but it's about, it's all about, you can't not plan. You have to talk and figure it out in advance. And that, I don't think people really understand that till they have a problem. And
Right.
The other thing is, do you want to remain living on a property or not living on that property? That's a very, very big point. And sometimes that will involve more complex subdivisions or other activities that are necessary and expensive. And these are things that are part of the process, but nothing eliminates you from the process till you've figured it out and gone through it.
Absolutely. And nothing is set in stone. To sign that deed and hand over the property, or sign that contract, you receive a check. Nothing is. I've seen properties come right to the last, the few days before closing. The owner said, "I'm really not comfortable," or something I want to change, and we've gone back to the drawing board and started all over again. But it's your property. That's our point. It's your property. It's not our property. It's your property, and we're just there to give you an option. That's it.
I wanted to underscore something that Rich said with relates to errors, like you really should retain your own counsel. We can give some good advice, but you want to make good decisions for your situation. And with regards to errors, the first thing that popped into my mind is I recently watched the July webinar of this organization, and Ellie and Basil gave a fabulous presentation on how to prepare to pass on your land or anything, any assets that you have. So I would recommend going back to their presentation from July.
Yeah, that really was a great presentation. I enjoyed it a lot, and we got a lot of comments on it. But they're really integrated. They're very important. And there is an interesting question here about forest preservation programs. And there is, Trish and I were talking earlier today, there's a bill pending right now to add forests to the farmland preservation program for easement purposes. So that bill is pending in New Jersey. So does anybody see any other questions that we feel we should be responding to? A lot of them are specific or.
Well, here's an easy one for you, Rich. Somebody asked, there was a ton of information in the presentation. Will the
Yes.
recording be available for our viewing at a later date?
Yeah, all of our webinars are on our YouTube page. It'll be up probably in about 3 days. So tune in again if you'd like. And I'm just going down the list now to see if we missed anything. But I think that you've covered most of the questions that we had. Some were a little specific. And now here's a good one, though. I can't afford to lose my real estate tax exemption. Now, I don't know whether that's a farmland exemption or an age exemption, but they have an exemption. Will I lose it under preservation? A lot of questions, relate to that interplay between farmland assessment continuing post-preservation. How does that work?
Well, it depends how it's preserved, is the one first question. But Peter, maybe you could talk to the farmland preservation side.
I could talk to the assessment side if you want.
Sure.
Okay.
Why don't you start there? We'll get
I'll
down.
jump in. Well, if you still have to comply with farmland assessment to get farmland assessment.
Right.
You would as far as the assessment on your property, it might be altered by the conservation easement, but it would not be altered to the level of a farmland assessment valuation. And so if you wanted to retain farmland assessment, that protection, you would have to comply with farmland assessment requirements. If it's a forest property, you'd have to maintain your plan and you'd have to follow your plan, whether it's a stewardship or woodland management plan. So there are some people who believe that if they put the farm in preservation, that they no longer have to comply with farmland assessment in order to be eligible, and that is just not correct.
Right.
I think it's a good, if you retain any amount of interest, you have to retain the responsibility to manage it, whether it's farming or stewarding it or foresting it.
And the other thing that I would recommend people do is also speak to a tax advisor, because every transaction could have potential tax consequences. And so that might drive how you structure the transaction, the form the transaction takes, whether it's an easement or a fee transaction or some other components to delayed compensation or whatever it might be. But that would be very important as a landowner to do that.
Absolutely. And we encourage everyone to do that, because we're not there to provide legal advice. We're not there to provide tax advice. We can give you some hints about things to look at. Individuals who have a property value, let's say the property is valued at $1 million and they're willing to sell it for $500,000. That difference is called a bargain sale. And you should ask your tax advisor or your attorney working with you, what is the advantage of a bargain sale and how you can use that money against your capital gains and other taxes you pay to the federal government, and for how many years. So that's the bargain sale is one of those key pieces that you may want to look at. But we're not giving tax advice. We're just suggesting you might ask that question.
I'm just scrolling down and seeing if there's anything new. And we welcome everybody again to watch this again on the YouTube page. The contact information will be there, but I will also be sending out an email to everyone who attended with the contact information, just as a courtesy to our presenters, so they can be sure you've received it. And I thank you all for your participation. It was a great presentation, really put it in the context of where it comes, where does it originate, what's its importance to our state and our country, and the value to individual landowners as well in pursuing these opportunities. So
Thank you,
with
Rich.
that, everybody have a very, very happy holiday and a
Happy holidays.
happy new year. And that's from this group and from the New Jersey Forestry Association. And we look forward to seeing you at our January webinar. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care.
Good night.